Okay, so let's talk a little bit about voting rights. This has been an interesting topic. We've seen it both at the state level here, it's been the local conversation, but also at the national level. So let's talk first at the state level. For felons, ex-felons, felons getting out of jail, being restored the right to vote, there's a bill out there to do that. This is obviously a bill I believe you would support.
Oh yeah, we have supported this bill from the very beginning, and I think it's a really important bill that now we have seen in the Assembly has gotten bipartisan support. And the reason it's gotten bipartisan support is because it's the right thing to do. If a person serves their time and goes through prison and gets out and is now paying taxes and expected to get a job and be totally reinvested in society, they should also have the right restored to vote. If you've served your time, you're done, and you should be able to get that right back. And so for me, I think this is another way of us making sure that they are fully invested in society and that they are making sure that they have the rights that all of the rest of us do if they've served their time. And I think it's the right thing to do, and we support this bill.
I'll follow up on the national side of it first, Alan. So let's just talk this bill specifically first.
Okay.
Your thoughts on I guess just the bill in general. What are your thoughts?
You know, I have mixed feelings. So first of all, when you get out of prison, you have not served your time. You have gotten out of prison, but you also have to go through a parole period where you're paroled out and you have a parole you have to go to parole officer you have to go to for a period of time, a year, 2 years, whatever it happens to be. And so, I mean, I have an issue on that. I think that a person should go through that period of time. After that period of time is up, I would have no problems with considering restoring civil rights, including the right to vote. I wouldn't do it the moment they get out of prison, though. And I think that is an issue. It's an issue for a lot of reasons. First of all, Democrats are pushing this because they know that the majority of these ex-felons are going to register Democrat. An Annals in American Academy of Political Science study recently showed in New York as an example of one of many ex-felons are registered overwhelmingly as Democrats, 61.5%, 25.5% no affiliation or a minor party affiliation, only 9% registered as Republicans. And so, I mean, there's a good reason that Democrats want to be able to do this. That's because they know it's going to be more of a voting base for them immediately. You know, that's lowering the voting age to 16 is another Democrat concept and everything. So, I mean, they're trying to get as much of a voting base as they can. Again, after you're through with your probation period, your parole period, and all that is done, I say, okay, go ahead and do it. But I wouldn't do it upon the release from prison.
In that CNN town hall, Bernie Sanders said, well, this has been the ploy of Republican governors across the country to try to suppress the vote by increasing the penalties and just trying to disenfranchise potential voters. And then he also said that he would support people in prison now currently voting, and then when he was pressed on it by somebody in the audience, including somebody who was like the Boston Marathon bomber, for example. So anybody who is still in prison, he says they should all have the right to vote. Do you agree with going that far, maybe when they haven't yet paid back their debt to society?
Look, I don't think we should conflate these two issues. What we're asking for in the state of Nevada is returning people's rights to vote after they have served their time in prison, period, or jail. In the state of Nevada currently, if you are in jail for a misdemeanor, you can still vote. Your right to vote has not been taken away. Or if you have not been convicted and you are in prison or jail, you still have your right to vote. So those folks should still be able to vote. They still have their rights, and they should still be able to exercise their right to vote. Absolutely, in the state of Nevada or wherever.
Key phrase being convicted felon.
Again, I don't care whether they're a Republican, a Democrat, a nonpartisan, an independent. If you have your right to vote, you should be able to vote. And it doesn't matter if you're in jail serving time, but if you're a felon, that right has been taken away from you. You serve your time in jail, and then you get out, and you're paying taxes, you're doing all the things that all the rest of us do, you should have your rights restored. That is what we're fighting for, and that is what we're talking about in this conversation, and that's what the bill does in the state of Nevada.
So you should have your rights restored, your civil rights restored. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Would that include also the right to be able to buy a gun?
If that's your right, then absolutely.
So you would support the right of people who serve time.
It depends on what they have done It depends on if they committed a crime with a gun. You have to look at all of those circumstances. But your right to vote is your civil right to vote, period. You're not committing a crime with a gun. If somebody commits domestic violence with a gun, do you think they should get their gun back?
Well, see, I'm not for restoring the rights
What
until
if
they're
somebody
finished
gets
patrol.
shot with a gun? Do you think they should get their gun back?
I'm not for restoring the voting rights until they're through with the parole
I think
period.
voting
That's
rights
what
are
I'm saying.
very different than if somebody has used a gun in a crime to do something.
There's nothing in the Constitution about voting rights, but there is about the Second
There's
Amendment.
nothing about
There is
being
the
able
Second
to
Amendment.
have a right to vote.
When you're an ex-felon? No, there's nothing in
As
there
an
at all.
American citizen, there's nothing in there about the right to vote.
And
it is your right to vote in this
what's there
country.
as an American citizen. The Second Amendment is your
They're
right to bear
still
arms.
American
So
citizen,
once you,
even
once
if they
you-
get out of jail.
So once you get out of jail, out of prison,
and you've served your
whatever
time
you've
and you're
served,
paying taxes.
then you should be able to go ahead and buy a gun.
Let me ask this then.
Well, that's what you're saying.
Let me ask
Restoring
this.
civil
So,
rights.
not a non-violent felony,
Sure.
the right to own a firearm after you've paid your debt there, would you be okay with something like
That's
that?
fine. But if it's something where you have gone and you have committed a crime with a gun and there is some sort of troubling issue, then yeah, we should look at those issues and say that person probably shouldn't have access to a weapon. I think that's pretty reasonable.
The other point that you made about Crazy Bernie with his idea of voting while you're in prison and stuff like that, when you're like the Boston Marathon bomber, and he said, yeah, sure. And then Kamala Harris said, yeah, well, it's a conversation we should have. I love Democrats, by the way, when they say that. That means I don't want to come down on one side of the issue or another. That's a conversation we should be having. Pocahontas says it all the time. So, she says it's a conversation we'd have. People started blasting her. The next day she came out and said, well, and then she tried to mitigate it by saying, I'm against, people who commit violent crimes. She never made any correction on her, let's have a conversation about it. Bernie is crazy, out and out nuts. He's a cuckoo. And the idea of wanting to have people vote in prison, regardless of what they did, like the Boston Marathon bomber, sure, I think that they ought to let them vote in prison for sheriff. And for warden, too. I think they ought to vote for the warden. I mean, let's do that. And you can get a warden that's going to be more sympathetic to you as well.
Again, I'm not going to conflate the two issues. What the bill does in the state of Nevada and what Bernie Sanders is talking about are two very different things.
It seems like you guys aren't that far apart, really, on the Nevada bill.
No,
it seems
the
like you guys are
Nevada
actually
bill is a
pretty
great
close.
bill,
Well,
and we should be supporting it, and that's why it had bipartisan support.
It's not a great bill. And,
It is a great bill.
And again, I would do it after the probation period, the parole period was over. But I would not. Do it right out of prison. And it's not a matter of conflating the issue.
No, it is.
No, it's a matter not of conflating the issue. It's a matter of looking at what happened in the past week politically in this country, and that is a major Democrat political candidate has come out and made an insane statement. And I just think that you don't want to conflate it with the bill that's before legislature in Nevada and Carson City. I understand that, but it's fair to comment on the fact that this guy is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. That's all.
Let me ask about another issue then that now that we've had a little bit of time to digest the Mueller report and that the candidates have worked through it and everything. Now another topic has been whether or not impeachment should be on the table. Harry Reid this week came out and said essentially that would be a waste of time and effort, especially this close to the election. Do you agree at this point that maybe Democrats should maybe focus more on the election in 2020 than impeachment now?
I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think that there are still questions in the Mueller report that need to be answered and should be answered for the American people. I don't know that that necessarily needs to be an impeachment right now. I think we can be focused on the election because elections do have consequences and there should be questions being answered about that Mueller report during the election. But also, I think there are real issues that need to be addressed by Congress. When we're talking to voters at the door, they want to hear about things like education and healthcare and how to fix those problems. Those are the problems that Americans are focused on right now. And so for me, I tend to agree with Senator Reid on this. I think we should be focused on the election, and I think we should be focused on holding Donald Trump accountable in that means at this point, because I think we're past the point of impeachment now. And we need to be focused on the real issues that everyday Americans are talking about. I don't think that there is any reason we shouldn't be talking about the Mueller report, asking questions about the Mueller report, and I don't think that's just something we sweep under the rug. But at the same time, I think there's other issues that we have to be focused on too.
What did you think of Senator Reid saying that this week?
Well, it's the same thing that Pelosi's been saying for some time also, basically, and she's trying to fend off the more radical wing of her party, from Maxine Waters to AOC and the rest of them. I mean, there is a division in the Democrat Party more on this than certainly in the Republican Party. The media credibility is what has been shattered during this Mueller investigation, more than anything at all. No collusion, no obstruction, we know that. No indictments, and if they want to think about impeachment, I say bring it on. I really do. I mean, I think it's going to help reelect Donald Trump. This whole thing began by the concept of this the Steele dossier, and we know that the Steele dossier was phony. We know that Hillary Clinton and her clan were behind a lot of that, and of course the most salacious stuff they tried to talk about was the P issue. You know, that when Trump found out he was staying in a hotel room, supposedly, as the story goes, that Obama stayed in, he hired prostitutes to come in and pee on the bed. I mean, that's what allegedly is in the Steele dossier. This whole thing has been completely phony. And the whole thing was made up from a phony, fake type of a concept. And I think that if they want to go ahead and impeach him, go ahead with it. I want to see an investigation commenced into Obama and Clinton and the rest of them to see what they had and what they were doing during that election. Obama was present. Supposedly he knew what was happening. And if there was some kind of Russian issues, why didn't he do something about it? So, yeah, there should be an investigation. Obama, Clinton, and all of them who were involved in this collusion to be able to prevent Trump from being elected.
When you look at the Democratic, the main party, the mainstream Democratic Party over the past couple of decades, you think of Harry Reid up at the top with those other figureheads. Do you think by Reid reiterating these comments this week that this is a way to try to fend off some of the more progressive part of the party?
I mean, I think he is trying to have the party fall in line. That doesn't necessarily happen on the Democratic side the same way it happens on the Republican side. I think that's part of why you see so many different factions within the Democratic Party. And this is me talking completely nonpartisan. I mean, just looking at it from a 20,000 foot view. This is going to continue to be an issue within the Democratic Party because you have some who think, okay, it's time to start to focus on 2020. There is so much at stake. We need to make sure that we're focusing on the real issues that are happening around immigration, around criminal justice reform, around women's issues, around healthcare, all of those things that are truly the most important issues that will be talked about during 2020. But again, I do think we do need to look at how do we hold Donald Trump accountable for what is in the Mueller report and for what has happened over the past 4 years. And so for me, you can do both of those things and you can have it both ways. But I don't know that impeachment at this point, that's the specific point of this, is the right road to take right now. Because there's a year and a half left. And that's not a lot of time in terms of politics. We need to be focused.
And I like Annette's analogy of walking and chewing gum at the same time. Republicans look at this as an issue, you know, the factions of the Democratic Party as a weakness, sometimes something to exploit. By seeing Senator Reid kind of dig his feet in the ground as well for the establishment, separate from how Annette sees it, do you see it the other way where this is a division in the party that could be worse than some people think?
I think it's a big division in the party that's bad for the Democrats. Republicans, like Democrats, and both at various times, have had our own divisions. I'm going to go back to 2009. Tea Party was begun right after Obama was inaugurated, and the Republican Party was in many ways split. I mean, at that time, there's no two ways around it. On the right, we question. I know on the left, you question, and that's been going on depending upon what's going on. We happen to be, the Democrats were unified in 2009 behind Obama, no doubt about it. We are unified now, with an exception or two, like one of the biggest rhinos ever, like Romney, and you know, those idiots. But I mean, the rest of the Republican Party is solidly behind Donald Trump. And again, I'm not including William Weld from Massachusetts and than, again, some of these other idiots out there. I'm talking about the 90, I think the latest I heard was 93 to 95% of Republicans are backing Donald Trump in his presidency and for re-election. That's a huge number. We haven't been unified like that in many years. I think Trump will be reelected. I don't think he has anything to answer for in the Mueller report. I think who has the answer for it are the people I mentioned already: Obama, Clinton, and Rice and some others, but also Susan Rice and others, but also the media. And I'm talking specifically now about CNN, MSNBC, and the other lying fake media who constantly said things like, we are going, impeach. You had Swalwell and what's that pencil next name guy? Yeah, the two of them that were asking for the impeachment. They said they had proof. They had proof that there was collusion with Russia. Absolute proof. They've seen it. It's 100%. He will be impeached. Well, now the Mueller report comes out, and we know that's just a load of crap. That didn't happen. And now when they're asked about it, they're going, well, I don't know, but I still saw something. I don't know what it was. These people are psyched, and they're freaked out because they know in 2020 Trump's going to win, and they don't know how to explain that to their constituents.
Let me put a period on the national stuff. Let's talk about here in the state. One of the bills, Senate 474, would put stricter limits and more time for teenage drivers before getting their license. I thought this was just an interesting bill to talk about. So 50 hours, including 10 at night, is the requirement now for a student driver before they can get their license. This would bump it up to 75 hours, 15 at night. And then I think if you're in a rural county that doesn't have access to like driver's ed nearby within 30 miles, it's another 50 hours of certified driving time. But just the idea that is this a bill that has a need? Is this an answer in search of a solution? A problem in search of a solution, I should say.
I've seen the way people drive in the state of Nevada. I think more time to get your license is always a good thing. Look, I got my license here. I remember what it was like. My parents were very strict about how I did that time and making sure I drove at night and during the day and things like that. I don't think having these requirements is unreasonable. I think that young people, I think that all people should have to go through these things because, again, I've seen the way people drive on our roads. I don't think having more time behind the wheel before you have a vehicle that you have to operate is a bad thing. I think those requirements should be on a lot of things. And so I don't necessarily know it's the most important bill of session, but I do think it's a good. I think it's a good bill because why not have a little extra time behind the wheel before you start operating it?
I couldn't get the analogy out. A solution in search of a problem. That's what I was trying to ask. Is this a solution in search of a problem?
Well, I like what you said about all. The word you use all because I moved here 20 years ago, and I'm wondering whether or not this should apply to adults as well as kids. Sure, I am agreeing with you. I don't think it's a bad deal for kids learning how to drive either. But yes, it does concern me about adults. I have seen, since I moved here, I have seen more people running red lights than I can ever imagine. I know I can make that light. I know it. I know it's orange right now, and it's red, and I'm only a couple hundred yards away. But if I floor it, I know I can make it in time. You've seen it. We've all seen it.
I saw it today driving here.
Oh yeah.
Right.
That's what concerns me about adults driving in this area also. Like you, I took driver's education in school, driver's education, driver's training, and had to go out with my father in the car and everything, and I graduated like you did up to be able to finally drive alone. My parents call when you get there because I don't want to make sure you got there. Yeah, it all makes sense. I don't object to this like you don't. But I'm just wondering whether or not we ought to add some requirements for adults when they start, and not just saying seniors. I'm not talking about the old people.
I'm talking about all people.
All people. Yeah.
When you get your license here.
Yeah.
Well, and then I could say even coming into work today, twice it happened where somebody made at least 3 or 4 lane changes across the freeway to make an exit.
And didn't use their directional. Yeah. No.
Oh no, of course not.
The
But the direct cut across.
Yeah.
Points made. Points made.
Sure. And I mean that's anecdotal. We could say we see it every day.
A decent bill.
All right.
Well, finally, this one's just been interesting. We've been talking more about the caucus coming up. So Nevada is making some changes for February 22nd, 2020 for the caucus day here. It just, to me, it seems like more of a primary now. 4 days of early caucusing, a couple of days during that of virtual caucusing, and then caucus day on that Saturday. Should we just make it a primary?
You can't make it a primary because the state doesn't have the money to pay for a primary. When you move to a primary election, the state has to pay for it. That is where the problem comes in. And so for us to continue to be an early state on both sides of the aisle, and for the parties to have to pay for these things, they're trying to move it to be more inclusive and to try and get more people to participate and have it be more fitting for the type of community that we have, which is a 24-hour town. People have jobs that kind of bleed into when they have the caucuses. So I do think they're trying to make it more inclusive and more open for people to participate. But again, you can't have a primary because when you move it to a primary, the state has to pay for it. And we don't have money for education. We don't have money for anything this session. There's no way to move it if we want to stay at the beginning of the line. And that's where the problem comes in.
I love tradition. I think tradition is great. A caucus is something that's very traditional, but just with the modifications and trying to keep up with the times, I mean, with Annette's points well taken about money and availability access, what do you think? Should we just make it a primary?
I said this many times. I participated in one caucus. I think they're ridiculous. I think that it's a waste of time, and I would like to see a primary if we're hell bent on having an early primary. Yes, we're going to have to pay additional money for that, the presidential primary. You're absolutely right. If we move the presidential primary to the regular primary that we have later in June, yeah, I mean, then we won't have to pay anything more for it, but we won't be in one of those early states.
And maybe we won't see the candidates.
And maybe the answer, I've thought of this for a long time, and suggested for a long time, is to compromise on that. So you move the primary to March, and you have the presidential primary along with the other primary issues in March, and that's it.
But the problem becomes with that, and because we've talked a lot about that as well, and I think it's an idea, but the problem becomes, do we really want candidates coming to Nevada over the holidays and canvassing during, different holidays in December? Because that's what will end up happening. You move that primary up to a March date or a February date, then you have them starting to come here even earlier, and you have all the other candidates who have to be on the ballot with them, your state senators, your other lower tier kind of elected officials that will be on the ballot in June, also campaigning. So it creates issues if you move it up like that, because I know I don't want people knocking on my door in December, and that is what's going to happen.
But I don't think that's it's a genuine argument, really. I'll tell you why. You've got a caucus now in February, which means that presidential issue, people coming here, they're going to be coming over the holidays or whatever.
I mean, they're already coming now, but...
Well, they're coming now, exactly. And they'll continue to come over the holidays and like that. If we moved a primary with the presidential primary and the other to, let's say, end of March, or whenever you choose a date, would we still have them coming early? Yes. We would have them, and we'd still have them coming here because we one of the middle primaries. Listen, I grew up in an area where we had primaries, and it worked out great. And having participated in a caucus, I was not impressed in the least bit. And this is not a partisan issue. This is not Republican or Democrat. I'm talking about I think that, and if it means more people voting, more coming out, some people on the right or left don't want more people to vote. I do. Have a primary, put it all together, let it be paid for the way it is, and that the candidates come when they may.
I think the problem becomes, though, if you move it up like that, or if you keep it in June where it is so you don't pay extra, the way that the structure has worked, at least now on the Democratic side, California's primary / caucus has been moved up to March. So a lot of those decisions on Super Tuesday are going to be made before we ever even get to...
Their caucus or their primaries in March?
Their primary now has been moved up.
They have moved it?
Yes, and so it's now at the beginning of March. So those things will be decided, because there's such a large voting population there, before we would ever even get a chance to vote. So that is part of the reason this has been done, is to keep it as a caucus so that both Republicans and Democrats in Nevada still play an important role in the primary / caucus process.
But we should do that on the same day as California.
So you think then if the caucus were to flip to some sort of a presidential primary, that would lose an early state status.
Absolutely, because we would move back. That is the whole reason, at least on the Democratic side, we became an early state, was because we were a caucus and we fit into the equations. There's a certain number of caucuses, there's a certain number of primaries that are held. There's an equation that is done on the Democratic Party side where they have those kind of in line. And so that is why we got our early state status, was because we were a caucus state.
But that's why I don't want, I mean, I understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
and I don't want to move the presidential primary to June
Right.
with the other stuff, and that's why I'm suggesting if you go from February caucus to a March primary for everything here, you're not going to lose as much momentum in terms of an early state.
Yeah.
And I don't know when California is doing theirs, whether it's
I think it's the first or second week of March.
Okay, we'll do
So-
ours
Around
second.
Super
Yeah.
Tuesday, yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
well, then let's do ours on Super Tuesday too. We're a super state. So let's do ours on Super Tuesday, and then people say, wow, Nevada is now part of Super Tuesday. That's fantastic.
Super Silver State.
But
There you
back
go.
to your original point, I think the process, they're trying to find a solution because the state does not have the money to move the primary at this point or pay for a primary at this point.
Separate.
And so, yes, they're trying to find a solution to make sure that everyone can participate.
All right, well, let's leave it there. We are figuring out how this whole voting nomination stuff works. Thank you both for coming
Thank
in.
you.